Typically, when I address you in this way, it's most often from one of the places that we're serving across the globe. In Haiti, in Ecuador, in Colombia, in Ethiopia, in Argentina, and many of the places that God's called us to be His hands and feet, often in places that we get to partner with Living Water International, bringing clean water to people. But today I stand at a place that is nearest and dearest to our heart. This is the place that enables us to do all of this in our hometown of Houston. And so it's a rare and beautiful privilege to teach you today from the roof of our new facility at 1100 Elder. We believe that if everything moves forward as it should, God willing, we will have our first weekend of worship services about 9 weeks from now. The first weekend after Labor Day, September 8th and 9th. And so as we prepare for that and we think about what is it that God's called us to in the city, who are we as a people, how do we get to where we are now, and what exactly kind of do we use to evaluate who we are and how we're doing, and are we doing the things that God's called us to? I wanted to take the time today to open the scriptures with you on the roof of our new facility that looks out on the city that we're called to love and to bless. We are in a city that's in great change. I spent the 4th of July with my family, my parents, my grandmother. My grandmother worked downtown from 1950 into the 70s. And she worked at Battlestein's department store. If you were around Houston in those years, you went to Battlestein's. And she witnessed, quite literally from the 50s on, the way that the downtown skyline and downtown itself changed. We went together through old photographs of the downtown skyline from around the time that she was born. And you could see this city in rapid change. And large cities often represent just that, change. And the church either thrives in change or we implode in the midst of change. Ecclesia has been, for our 13 years, a church that thrives in the midst of change. And our prayer is that as we adapt to a whole new world over the coming months, that more than ever we would trust in Jesus as our Savior, we would trust the leadership of the Holy Spirit, and that we would find that place of thriving in a world of constant, sometimes chaos. The great thing about the biblical narrative is that it begins in the garden, but it ends in Revelation in the city. So it's heaven is known, right? As my friend Tim Keller, who I learned so much from reading a fabulous book that he'll release this fall, that's going to be really helpful for our church. He says in the scriptures, when John sees the heavens revealed, he describes it not as a suburb coming down from the skies, but as a city coming down from the skies. It's not a suburb with all its parking lots and shopping centers and malls, but it's a city. It's a place of activity and a place of commerce and a place where people and art and culture thrive. And though we live all over this city, many of us in different suburbs of the city, we come here to worship and we gather in this place because we believe that God has called us to be a part of transforming the whole city. And over the last 13 years, we've been contemplating, how do we evaluate what it is that we called to do? And one of the influential passages you hear me read quite often is in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And it'll be the first passage that we study together today. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul talks about how we're evaluated, how we look at the work that God's called us to and see, are we successful? And Paul says, my job, his job as an apostle, as a church planner, was to plant the seed. And Apollos was called to water it. And growth comes from God. Paul says literally, we're gardeners. We step in and we garden and we nurture. Now, if you know much about gardening, we've been talking about this a lot this summer. You know that it's often hard. My son Solomon has become quite a gardener. He knows much more about gardening at this point in his life than I have ever known. And one of the things that Solomon's learned this summer is that even when you do a good job, you plant, you fertilize, you water, sometimes factors that are out of your control, like remarkable, unbearable heat, that will kill people, also will kill your plants, right? So he has some plants that just haven't made it. When we get up into triple digits, those plants just didn't survive. And the beautiful part of understanding our work, Ecclesia, as gardeners means that we have a responsibility, we have a job, it's work, we have some things that we're called to do. I'm going to talk to you more about that today. But it also means we don't get to be the ones that are in control. We water, we fertilize, we weed, we care for the garden, we tend to the garden. But ultimately what grows, it grows because of God. And so as we move in this transition into this new space and we contemplate all the things that God will allow us to be a part of, our deepest understanding is that none of it is because of us. We are blessed to be a part of it, but it is all because of God. And so Paul explains, he says, any growth comes from God. So the ones who water and plant have nothing to brag about. God, who causes the growth, is the only one who matters. The one who plants is no greater than the one who waters. Both will be rewarded based on their work. We are gardeners, Paul says in verse 9, and field workers laboring with God. You, Ecclesia, you, city of Houston, are the vineyard, the garden, the house where God dwells, right? This is the big shift in the New Testament. God didn't dwell in the temple, now he dwells in the vineyard. He dwells in the garden. He dwells literally within us. Paul explains, like a skilled architect and a master builder, I laid a foundation based on God's grace given to me. Now others will come along to build on the foundation. Each serves in a different way and is to build upon it with great care. That's the work that we've been called to build upon the foundation of Jesus with great care. And we believe that that will lead us to some remarkable opportunities to be the hands and feet of Jesus in this city in a beautiful and real way. There is, in fact, Paul says in conclusion of this section, only one foundation, and no one can lay any foundation other than Jesus, the Anointed. All that we do is based on the work of Jesus. And from that, we are allowed and have the rare and unique privilege to build on that, to be able to serve as we go about the Christian life. I want to just share with you a little bit of what's happening specifically at 1100 Elder. We're going to show you some images and help you see what the big room that we're going to worship in now looks like. You can see it's a lot bigger than the room we're in at Taft. The good news is we have a lot more parking than we do at Taft. And so people are gonna be able to park, they're gonna be able to come in, and our prayer, unlike what often happens at many of our services, we will literally have seats for everyone. So if you know me at all, you've been around Ecclesia very long, you likely know that the hardest experience of my week is when I need to get up and preach and it's clear that we don't have seats for people. I feel like our job as a church is to provide hospitality and space, and that when you come in, you ought to be free from the cares of the world and have an opportunity to hear God speak to you. Sometimes in our little space, it hadn't turned out quite that way. And so as we move into our space at 1100 Elder and into that big room, we have an opportunity to seat more people than ever before. You can see that we've got some fabulous space for our kids. Our babies are just going to be loving life. They're going to go from this little bitty room to a beautiful big room. The toddlers and older kids are going to have a space with an indoor playground, and all that is being built out now. You can get a sense of what much of it looks like. Our older elementary kids are going to have some of the most beautiful facilities you've ever seen. I mean, they just it's the kind of place you and I will want to sit and hang out in. I got to come to 1100 Elder with my family for the 4th of July. I got to bring my kids, and we took some time to see the fireworks, and they got to see the facility as it is now. Some of the new doors you're going to be blown away by in our worship space, that literally these massive doors that slide and will open up into the coffee shop, or we can close them during worship and keep them as really separate spaces. You can see ductwork going in, and AC units are going to be on the roof soon, and the finishes are happening in a few of the places on the brick that just look absolutely beautiful. And some of the prayers that we've written all over the space are now being covered and mudded over, and we're seeing this beautiful transformation before us. But my youngest, my 6-year-old Christian, said, "Dad, I'm sorry, but we're not as close to getting into this building as you think we are. We can't have church here." He said, "There's no potties," and he's right. There are not yet potties, but there will be soon. And so you may know that the good news was that we were able to raise all the money we needed to get into the building, to purchase it, to do all the demolition, asbestos abatement, to install windows. And then we entered into a new phase with Axiom Construction, where they were prepared to do everything we needed to do to get our occupancy. And so the full bid on that was about $1.36 million. And they have been hard at work getting that done. It's really good news that we've stayed in that budget range. There have been a few things that come out a little more expensive, and then we've saved money in other areas, and it's kind of balanced out. We have worked with a local bank, Enterprise Bank here in Houston, some fabulous people, and we have a short-term construction loan that covers that. It's going to get us by for a little while. We're going to be able to pay interest only and get into the building and be in a good spot, and then we'll begin to talk about how we address that $1.3 million. But not included in that $1.3 million are a lot of things that you actually need when we begin to worship in this space. And so what I want to invite you to be a part of is kind of an Ecclesia housewarming. We're going to get the keys to it with a certificate of occupancy from the city, we believe, in early August. But to make that space work, there's a lot of other things that need to happen. And so I want to tell you about what some of those things are and invite you and those that you may know and others that love and care for the work of Ecclesia, believe God's called us to something beautiful and remarkable that may want to be a part of that. These are just some of the finishings. So we know we have a few exterior doors that we're going to actually need when we get here. The city doesn't require us to have them. They're not in the bid, but they're going to be really helpful, about $15,000. We have windows that go within those doors, about another $4,000. The lighting package was not included in that bid, and that's a big one. It's a total of about $70,000. So you can see some of the building finishes are about $89,000. Some of the interior finishes that we really need to be able to worship there, like things like chairs for you to sit in. And I would just let you bring lawn chairs, but the truth is we wouldn't have enough, and we wouldn't have enough for our guests, and we're going to have to buy them eventually. And so we're just praying that we could gather our resources and make that happen. We have a friend that owns a company that's giving us chairs at cost. They're beautiful and remarkable, comfortable chairs. We're really excited about them. We'll bring some over from Taft, and we'll need to buy about 600, and that's about $42,000. We're going to need about 20 tables for the coffee shop and in the large space. That's another $3,000. We're going to have a platform in the back. You can basically just think of this as kind of stadium seating. So if you're in the back, you're elevated and can see a little bit better. That we're going to add in. That's another $10,000. Some staging. We don't have much of a stage, you can see here at Taft. Nothing extravagant, but simple staging that would be about $5,000. So those interior things that we need in the room to worship come to about $60,000. Then we have some technology needs. The audio and the sound system, it's a bigger room, it costs more, and we have to duplicate all the things that we have at Taft on a bigger scale in that space at Elder. We have a bid, great people coming together. The audio is about $76,000. The video components, like what you have here, that allow us to, as we will in the fall, share from the place in the world that we're going to be involved during Advent, and ask God to bless us so that we can give and share. We're going to need video resources for all of that, video screens and projectors and cameras and other things. That comes to about $48,000, and some small communication things for internet and phone that amount to about $5,000. You can see that total is a big one, about $129,000. Then we have some interior things that we've done to save some money along the way in our kids' spaces to provide smaller classrooms. We're going to use some shipping containers. We're going to need to buy 3 of them, and that's going to allow in our children's space to have some smaller classrooms. They're going to be really remarkable and beautiful, really, really cool. You're going to love the way that we use them. But we have 3 of those that aren't included in that, and so those come to about $10,000 to be able to cover all of that. I know that you were probably wondering, will we have coffee at Elder? We would like to, if we can get all the equipment. The kitchen will be fully built out on day 1. We'll be coming behind shortly after that. You may know that the kitchen has become more important because of some of the changes in regulations in terms of how we feed the homeless. And so already we had a vision for a restaurant that would share equally with rich and poor, and that restaurant's become more important than we ever dreamed that it would be. But we want to at least begin with our coffee bar being up and running, and so the build out and expenses there you can see are about $30,000. Again, that's money that we'll spend one time, it'll be done, and we will be in a really good and strong place. The kitchen will then come later. So all of that housewarming expense, you could call it, comes to about $318,000. I know for each one of us, some of you hear and say, you know what? Doors are $15,000, I can do that. Some of you hear chairs cost $70 and you go, I could buy a chair. I think the important thing is that all of us feel like we get to have a part in it. And that we just say, God, what is it that we can do in this season? And just so you know, from my perspective, although there are days that I have doubt and struggle, and some of the business things that we have to do can be a bit of a pain, I don't worry about it. I believe God is in control of it. God's always provided for us. He's led us to this space. And so as Lisa and I celebrate the opportunity to be able to share our resources so that we can have chairs and video equipment and sound equipment and classrooms for our kids and all the things that we need, we're reminded, as I want to remind you today, that we are here to be a part of this city. As Augustine wrote in his classic book, The City of God, that all of the Bible can be summed up as a tale of two cities. One is about the city of man, and the city of man is a place where people are aspiring, they're longing to thrive in commerce, to make it for themselves, they're exhausted. And the city of God is this unique place where justice reigns, where people share what they have, where everyone has enough. We believe that at Taft, and we're going to continue to serve at Taft. The good news for those of you, we're going to ask you more and survey you more this week and in coming weeks about exactly how we do that. We're going to continue to have services there. In fact, we've recently decided at least one, maybe multiple services on Sunday morning would not just be a service, but it would be a gospel brunch. We're going to have some waffles, maybe some fried chicken. You're going to be able to invite your friends. We want it to be a really evangelistic service. We're not giving up on that neighborhood. If you live there, we want you to come. Now, childcare and all those things are going to be here at 1100 Elder, but we're going to have more opportunities to serve this city. And what we get to do at Taft at 1100 Elder is declare the other city that Augustine spoke of, that the Bible constantly speaks of. It's the city of God. And so it's in the city of God that we have a unique citizenship. In fact, in Hebrews, it explains it beautifully. It tells us that they're talking about Jesus' suffering and what he's done so that we could be a part of this mission in the world. It says, in the same way that Jesus suffered and bled outside the city walls of Jerusalem to sanctify his people. And it tells us, let's then go out to him and resolve to bear the insult and abuse that he endured. Now that's a heavy calling. For as long as we are here, we do not live in any permanent city, but are looking for the city that is to come. Ecclesia, that's our calling. That's what we get to do. That through Jesus then, let us keep offering to God our own sacrifice, the praise of his lips that confess his name without ceasing. And let's not neglect what is good and share what we have, for these sacrifices all please God. We have a unique privilege today. In fact, even as we come and take communion, we will this week and up until the weeks we move to Elder, we're going to begin to take an offering to cover the housewarming for Ecclesia, to try to provide these basic necessities that allow us to step in on day one and thrive and function. I want to invite you to involve your kids. We may need to do some car washes. We may need to serve together, to invite neighbors and others that would want to be a part of this beautiful work. And in it, we will have much to celebrate as we share. But our ultimate goal is not just to be a part of this city, the city of Houston. I love it. It's got great Mexican food. I love the Astros even when they lose. I have somehow made the transition from being a Houston Oilers fan that's had my heart broken repeatedly to loving the Houston Texans. Some of my best days were when the Rockets won. This sermon's quickly becoming a sports sermon, isn't it? I love this city is what I'm trying to tell you. But more than I love this city, I want this city to reflect the city of God. I want it to be a place where everyone has enough, where we share. I see it often at Taft. I can already see it unfolding at Elder in beautiful ways. And I believe, Ecclesia, what God has called us to over the decades to come is more beautiful than we could ever imagine.